RKO!
I hear voices in my head, they counsel me, they understand, they talk to me.
Welcome to episode 18 of RKO.
You didn't know?
I'm Kayvon. You just heard Russell. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us for this episode. We're really excited to bring you this episode. This is part 2 of our 3-part WrestleMania special. Of course, WrestleMania 31 happening in less than 2 weeks. We're going to be posting our predictions for WrestleMania 31 exclusively on our Facebook page. Everybody out there is on Facebook. All you have to do is go to Facebook, go to that search bar and type in RKO. You didn't know. You'll see our page pop up. Just hit like, and you'll get all these awesome results and news stories show up in your timeline. There's lots of great stuff on there, plus links to our this episode of our podcast and past episodes of our podcast. So definitely check that out. We're trying to grow our Facebook page, and we would love to have your comments. And we want to know what you think about our podcast. Did we get it wrong? Did we get it right? Any additional thoughts? Please let us know. Feel free to comment on any of our posts and give us your thoughts. We really want this to be an interactive thing. So we appreciate your support and your listening. And as you know, if you listen to episode 17, our last episode of the podcast, we covered WrestleManias 1 through 15. And now we're going to cover WrestleMania starting at 16, also known as WrestleMania 2000, up to last year's WrestleMania 30. WrestleMania 31, that's happening in 2 weeks, we will discuss. We will have a podcast that is released just 2 days after that WrestleMania, and we will, I'm sure, be talking about the events that happened at this year's WrestleMania 31. So let's get right into it, Russell. We've compiled a list of matches that we think were the standout matches of the second half of the WrestleManias here. They weren't necessarily the last match on the card or billed as the main event. Most of the times they were. These are just the matches that Russell and I think were the standout matches of the card. In some instances, there are more than one, obviously. And, of course, we disagree on a couple of them. We'll get to that as we go along here. The list we're looking at here, we've kind of pre-discussed what we think we should be talking about and focusing on. There are a few matches we won't be focusing on, but we will have a post of honorable mentions that we didn't discuss here on the podcast that will show up on our Facebook page. Let's start with WrestleMania 16, also known as WrestleMania 2000. Russell and I are pretty much in agreement that the focus of this WrestleMania, or the standout, all things considered, of this WrestleMania was the triangle ladder match. Wasn't actually billed as a TLC match. That didn't happen until that summer at SummerSlam. These 3 teams had their first TLC match. However, this was much like a TLC match. 3 teams. You had to climb a ladder, grab those tag titles, and the teams were, Russell, why don't you go ahead and tell our listeners, for those who don't know, who the 3 teams involved in this match were.
Well, you had Edge and Christian. You had the Hardys, and you had the Dudley Boys. And basically, like Kayvon was saying, this is the preempt to what we were going to be known as the TLC matches here later on down the road. This is something you had never seen at a WrestleMania. It was kind of groundbreaking, in a lot of the DVDs they even talk about. This was the match that kind of set the tone for later on WrestleManias. So I thought, in my opinion, that this is what stole the show, this triple threat tag match. It was, like I said, it was very groundbreaking at the time, and led to many matches between these 3 tag teams.
Yeah, and it was at a time too when the tag team division was just at its peak in the WWE. This is kind of leaning towards the end of the Attitude Era, I guess, but this is definitely when WWF was still very, very popular. And like Russell said, this match is on a lot of the greatest hits compilation DVDs. It's featured on the superstars involved in this match. We'll talk about it as a crowning moment or defining moment in their career. I think it's one of those moments that Edge and Christian talk about, who won the match, of course, that they this is kind of a moment where they realize their dreams. There they are standing as the tag team champions at WrestleMania, something they had dreamed about since they were really young. So definitely a great match. I mean, if you haven't seen it, check it out. If you have the WWE Network, which is only
$9.99,
it's definitely available on there, so check that out. Let's move forward. WrestleMania 17. Some hail this as the greatest WrestleMania of all time, and I definitely think from top to bottom this was a great WrestleMania, probably my favorite WrestleMania we've seen so far. We do have a couple honorable mentions that you'll see on Facebook for this WrestleMania as from WrestleMania 2002. But the thing about this main event that we're going to mention as kind of the pinnacle of this WrestleMania was, the match itself was really intense. The fallout of the match, whether good or bad booking in hindsight, was a huge deal. I remember being in middle school and thinking, I can't believe that just happened. Of course, we're talking about the no disqualification match for the WWE Championship between The Rock, Stone Cold Steve Austin, and Russell. Go ahead and tell our listeners what am I talking about? What happened at the end of that match that I think a lot of people couldn't believe?
Well, you had a swerve and you had a heel change there at the end with Stone Cold Steve Austin and Vince McMahon, which you would never thought they would have been on the same page. It kind of, and the funny thing is, it kind of set the tone for where they were going that next year, because at the time you had, the McMahons were very much involved in the storyline. In fact, on that pay-per-view, also WrestleMania, you had Shane and Vince McMahon in a street fight. And, that involved Trish Stratus. If I remember correctly, Trish Stratus had gotten involved, and Linda McMahon was supposedly in a wheelchair and comatose. And that's what got Shane McMahon to fight his dad, was because they had caught the two, him and Trish Stratus, Vince McMahon and Trish Stratus, and she goes as far as pushing her off the stage. So it was kind of crazy. So at the end of the WrestleMania, you get Vince McMahon helping Stone Cold Steve Austin, and you get that heel turn.
Well, and the thing is, and like you mentioned, it also ties into the WrestleMania before. I mean, I don't know if it's foreshadowing in a sense of storyline, but it's definitely, if you remember the year before, there was a McMahon in every corner in that fatal four-way match for the WWE title. And the thing about that is Mr. McMahon was in The Rock's corner, but at the end of the match, he ended up turning on The Rock, helping Triple H to win. For a second year in a row, McMahon turns on The Rock, not that he was necessarily on his side at 17, but the thing about it is he aligned himself with Stone Cold Steve Austin, which Russell pointed out. No one would have ever really expected that, considering Stone Cold rose to popularity for going against the corporation. So that was really interesting. It was almost a continuation of what we had seen the year before. Those two WrestleManias blended in together. But definitely that match was one of my favorites, one of my top two favorites, I would say personally, from a WrestleMania. Russell, WrestleMania 18, I know, holds a special place in my heart. That was my first pay-per-view I ever went to. I was lucky enough that my mom took me there when I was like 14 years old. I was there live. My first WrestleMania, first pay-per-view, we had seats on the floor. The atmosphere was outstanding in the Sky Dome. I mean, I'll never forget standing on my chair the entire match for the match that, goes down, just maybe even just for the symbolism of the match and how important the match was in the history books of professional wrestling for Rock and Hogan. I definitely have great memories of that match. Russell, why don't you talk to me a little bit about your thoughts on Hogan versus The Rock from WrestleMania 18?
Well, it was billed icon versus icon. And, you didn't think you were going to be able to see, kind of a generation torch passing. I had told a lot of my friends and my their kids and so forth that this was the passing of the torch that I had witnessed when I was a kid with Andre the Giant and Hulk Hogan. You know, Andre passed the torch over to Hogan at WrestleMania 3. 15 years later, you get Hogan basically passing the torch to The Rock. Now, some disagreed with the selection of The Rock being Hogan's opponent because at the time, NWO had come into, you know, the WWE, WCW basically was null and void anymore, and you had basically Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, and Hogan, you know, coming into the WWE, and why not put Hogan with Stone Cold and have that match? Instead, we got Stone Cold versus Scott Hall with Kevin Nash in the corner, which Stone Cold didn't like at all, you know, that the fact that he wasn't billed as the top dog, which I don't, you know, I can understand. But instead we get Rock Hogan, and we get the passing of the torch, and it was kind of one of those things that I wanted Hogan to win, but I knew he wasn't going to. And it's kind of funny because on a lot of the podcasts I said I was sick of seeing Hogan win, but it was just something seeing him back after all those years.
It was nostalgia. The crowd was so nostalgic for him.
The crowd
was help but cheer for him.
The crowd was so much into it, and watching the match, it was so dramatic. I mean, it didn't last that long, but it was so dramatic. And I just remember some of the things that he was calling The Rock. You know, he was calling him Meatball and you know, come on, Meatball. And he had done that in the Rocky movie,
right?
Which basically got him over. You know, Rocky 3, which was his debut in movies and such. And when he was playing Thunder Lips in the movie, he kept calling Balboa Meatball, and that's what he kept saying to The Rock. And the crowd was like half and half. That was the first time you actually seen the crowd kind of be split between two wrestlers. You know, it wasn't really a face versus heel, or it was kind of like you had people that were The Rock fans and people that were Hogan fans, and there was a match where Hogan was getting more cheers.
Oh, definitely.
You know,
I mean, I can remember being there. I was like literally being a 14-year-old kid, I was like literally the only person cheering for The Rock in the arena because, you know, when you're a kid and you have your favorite, you know, that's who you cheer for. I really almost couldn't understand why everyone was cheering for Hogan, but you know, of course, looking back now, I get it. But the thing too about that match, Russell, is there's a really sweet moment at the end of that match where, you know, storyline aside, like there was a genuine moment where even though The Rock was the winner of that match, at the end of the match, he stepped out of the ring and let Hogan pose for the fans and have his moment with the fans. And the fans embraced him. And even though The Rock was the winner, you know, he walked up the ramp, Hogan met him up there, and they embraced at the top of the ramp. So, you know, you got it's more than just a quote, heel from the NWO turning face, but it was a moment of Hogan coming home and being accepted again, you know, back by the WWF, the WWE audience. It was like a real genuine moment.
And because of the way that the crowd reacted, that actually flipped the storyline from from Hogan being part of the NWO to actually Hogan kind of going back to he
went to the red and yellow.
Red and yellow.
He was a Hulkamaniac again, and the thing about that is it led to, you know, you continue on later that year in 2002, Hogan was back in the red and yellow, and of course, he got a WWE championship reign, or an undisputed championship reign at the time, you know, because basically, you know, the fans embraced him so much. So that was a real special moment. You know, WrestleMania 18, like I said, will always be special for me, but Hogan versus Rock, I think, like Russell said, there was something about that match where it wasn't long. It wasn't the best match you've ever seen, but because of the atmosphere and because of those two characters, every moment and every movement in that match seemed big. So that was a big one.
It was your Hogan versus Andre for me. That was your defining moment in wrestling.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. 19, Russell and I have actually talked quite a bit about WrestleMania 19. It's an interesting one just because I think of it in terms of kind of the end of the Attitude Era. I mean, some people might think Hogan versus Rock is kind of the ending of the Attitude Era, or unifying the WWE and WCW titles to get the Undisputed Championship. But definitely I think that WrestleMania 19 was the end. And I think that there are a lot of great matches on that show. But the main match that, to me, it was a hard pick, hard to narrow down. I think Russell and I disagree on what we think the best match of the show was. I just think because Chris Jericho idolized Shawn Michaels ever since he wanted to be a wrestler, and the fact that these two are such great workers, and that match had such psychology in it, and the fact that it was Shawn Michaels returning, to WrestleMania after, well, at that point, it had almost been 5 years since he had been full-time wrestler. He had returned at SummerSlam the year before, but there were a lot of emotional things going on in this match with the real-life respect between these two and the quality of match they had. So to me, Chris Jericho versus Shawn Michaels, best match, WrestleMania 19. But Russell, you think differently about 19, right?
Yeah, I actually preferred Lesnar and Kurt Angle. I mean, it was, two wrestlers who actually were wrestlers before. You had a gold medalist in Kurt Angle, NCAA wrestling champion Brock Lesnar. I think this was kind of seeing the young guns, finally go at it. And some of the spots in the match were kind of crazy. I remember Brock Lesnar doing the moonsault and about knocking himself out. It went about 20 minutes, so it was a really good match. A lot of back and forth, of course. And I think it projected Brock Lesnar on, as being, the man there, especially ending the era of the Attitude Era. So I really enjoyed that one. One of the other things was, we were talking about the Undertaker and the Streak. This is one of the first times that he had fought two guys. He beat Big Show and A-Train in a handicap match. Now, he wasn't the Undertaker. He was the American Badass at the time. New in the persona, ride the motorcycle. Wasn't kind of what we were used to with the Undertaker. He was kind of going through that character change, if you will, at the time. So, but I thought the championship match was a lot better.
Yeah, a lot of great matches to pick from at 19. Definitely really an epic WrestleMania. It meant a lot in the timeline of WWE as far as the difference between the Attitude Era and the modern era of WWE. We roll around to WrestleMania 20 at Madison Square Garden in New York City. Russell and I wanted to mention that this was the first match on the card was John Cena's first WrestleMania. Obviously a man who would go on to headline WrestleManias and be, WWE's top star for the next decade and a half. And or 10 years, I guess, from there. 10 years plus. He'd been in the WWE a few years before WrestleMania 20, but this was his first big career-defining moment, and it set him on a path to greatness there for a long time to come. He defeated Big Show for the U.S. title there. The crowd was solidly behind him before people started to, some people at least, get a little tired of the same old shtick with Cena. So Cena's first WrestleMania appearance, you had a great WWE title match between Eddie Guerrero and Kurt Angle. Of course, the main event was probably the best match in, I think, Russell and I's mind from that WrestleMania. Triple threat for the world title. The 2004 Royal Rumble winner, Chris Benoit, was using his Royal Rumble win to challenge the current world champion, Triple H. And there was a third man in that match who had an existing rivalry with Triple H ongoing, and that was Shawn Michaels. So you had Triple H, Shawn Michaels, and Chris Benoit. Chris Benoit, of course, winning that match. Russell, talk to me a little bit about the brutality of that match and what happened after that match as far as the celebration goes.
Well, you go back and look and watch the match. There was a lot of crazy spots between all three of the wrestlers. Shawn Michaels and Triple H, they are buddies outside of wrestling. They trust one another wholeheartedly. They got each other's back. So sometimes it looked like it was a 2-on-1 deal. They had the previous was Eddie Guerrero defeating Kurt Angle was on the card right before that, and so as I'm watching this triple threat match, I'm remembering Guerrero and Dean Malenko and Perry Saturn and Benoit coming in as the Radicals, and basically the WCW's undercard guys coming in to WWE, and you didn't kind of think much that was going to happen with these guys. And I'm watching this triple threat match, and Benoit had Triple H in this crossface, and I'm screaming at the TV, tap, 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 and he finally does, and the emotion from him, and then you had his friend for many, many years, going back to ECW and WCW, Eddie Guerrero come out and they're having this celebration with these two guys. It was very emotional. You kind of seen what they had went through inside the ring and then, later in life outside the ring. You didn't kind of know some of the brutalities that both of these wrestlers have went through. They're both gone. One by choice, one by not, and it's a tragedy both ways, and kind of tells you what can happen in wrestling, but behind the scenes, we don't know what goes on in these guys' life. But when they put on these matches, they put their bodies on their line, careers on their line, and you watch it and it draws you in so much, you don't see the backstory or the back life, what they're going through, and probably until it's too late. One of the other things I wanted to touch on with this WrestleMania was that this was the second time that The Undertaker and Kane had fought. Now, it's kind of the difference because Undertaker was basically now with Paul Bearer, Kane was not, they had kind of switched sides a little bit with the storyline.
Well, this was Undertaker's return to the dark side too, because like you said, he had been the biker gimmick previously and was gone for a while, so he was coming back for the first time in a long time as the Demon, the Undertaker. Right.
A thing to catch on, something, just a couple of them that we can touch base on, because this was a really stacked WrestleMania. And what I mean by really stacked WrestleMania is because we had a Playboy evening gown match between Corey Wilson and Sable. Oh, my. Yeah, defeating Stacy Keibler and Miss Jackie. WWE at the time, believe it or not, wasn't really as PG as what they were now. They're kind of more G compared to what they were 10 years ago. They had divas that were posing for Playboy and so forth. So what got this match was we had divas that kind of didn't like the fact that they were some of the divas were asked to pose for Playboy. So it was kind of like the girls that didn't want to do it against the girls that did do it. But probably the downlet of the night was Goldberg and Brock Lesnar, with Stone Cold Steve Austin as a guest referee. You have three iconic wrestlers in the ring, and you would think that this match would deliver. But, of course, you have Brock Lesnar leaving the company, Goldberg leaving the company, and the internet buzz and the crowd knew that they both were leaving the company. So the match was a total bumper. The best part of the match was Stone Cold giving them both stunners at the end. So you would think that an opportunity with these three guys being in the ring was wasted. that was what was most memorable to me. Other than the celebration, was the high of the celebration compared to the low of that match. And the in-between, like I said, it was a definitely stacked WrestleMania card. Hadn't seen one like that in quite some time.
Yeah, that you're right. That Brock Lesnar Goldberg match with Stone Cold could have been something completely different, but with the crowd turning on that match and knowing that both of those competitors were leaving soon, the crowd just wasn't having it. Not to mention the first big part of that match was stale. There wasn't movement or anything, so there wasn't any big hits or anything. So it was pretty stale at the beginning of that match too. So yeah, it was that was just one of the weird ones, I guess. But Stone Cold did of course save the day at the end of that. WrestleMania 21, a great one. 21. On the other side of the country in Hollywood, John Cena won his first world title here, won the WWE championship from JBL, and Batista also rose to the top that year, beating Triple H in the main event for the world title. But to me, a match that as weeks were getting closer and closer to WrestleMania 21, I was getting more and more excited about, was the very first ever Money in the Bank ladder match. The winner has to climb a ladder, grab a briefcase, and in that briefcase is a contract that guarantees you a world title match that you can cash in and have a match anytime within the next year. Edge won that match. To me, that match was just brutal. The secondary match I had listed as another honorable mention, of course, was Kurt Angle and Shawn Michaels. I mean, those two are just phenomenal together. They had a great series of matches that year. Russell, you agree that first Money in the Bank was really good, right?
I do. I think that the way that match ended up being, you now have the Money in the Bank matches that basically made its own pay-per-view because of how it went.
Yeah.
It was kind of like adding more people to it with the craziness of the TLC matches. So, then you put a new contract, new stipulation on there. It was kind of crazy of what they were doing with these gimmick matches, what they were getting over. The other thing that had started from that WrestleMania was not only did you have the first Money in the Bank, but you also have the first mention of the streak. And that's by Randy Orton saying that he was the legend killer and that he was going to take out The Undertaker and end the streak. And that was the first mention of the streak that we came to know, so well. The match that I thought, came out on top, or that, basically stole the show, I believe that was with Undertaker, Randy Orton in the singles match. But the other one that I thought was really good was Kurt Angle and Shawn Michaels.
Orton and Undertaker was really good. Yeah, you're right. The Randy Orton, he was I think the first guy to say I'm gunning for the streak. He acknowledged the streak verbally. I think, unless I'm wrong, at WrestleMania 18, when Undertaker fought Ric Flair, at the end of the match after he beats Ric Flair, he holds up his hands and he counts his fingers one by one, 10, because I think that meant he was 10-0.
Right.
He didn't say anything. It was just like a gesture he made. But you're right. Randy Orton kind of started a trend there where now every year after that, someone say, "I'm going for the streak." That was a really good one, and along like we said with Kurt Angle and Shawn Michaels. So big things happening at 21, 22. Hey, this was my second WrestleMania. I was there also. And I'm just saying that to get perspective of it's so different when you're there versus when you watch it back, because the crowd's energy, the atmosphere, it's really interesting being there versus TV. I mean, I remember the crowd was just on fire, at least in the section I was sitting at, for the main event, John Cena versus Triple H for the WWE title. To me, though, hey, Mick Foley got his WrestleMania moment. Edge had a WrestleMania moment. Edge versus Mick Foley. I mean, they went hardcore. Flaming table that Mick Foley got speared through, that Lita lit on fire. I was also impressed with another, I guess, hardcore style match was Mr. McMahon versus Shawn Michaels. I know Russell's not too crazy about that one. I thought there were some really good spots in that. But Russell, there was I know you like the Edge and McFoley match, but you mentioned, and we'll kind of show this list on Facebook in a sort of way too. But you also, I think, wanted to mention there was a kind of a special women's match that happened between Trish Stratus and Mickie James at this WrestleMania.
Yeah, this is when the Nut Job won the title.
Yeah, that was a famous commentary line there. Yeah,
that was a famous commentary line by
I forget who said it. It was either Cole or King, but it was just, I think it was probably King, but it was just like, the Nut Job has won the title. And she looked nutty. Her face was, she looked crazy.
The match was very intense. The storyline behind it a little bit was Mickie James had come into the WWE, and Trish Stratus was like her idol, and she was following around Trish Stratus and basically started dressing like Trish Stratus and started acting like Trish Stratus, and so it contemplated with their final match, and she ends up winning over Trish Stratus, and the crowd ate it up. That's why I remembered it so well, because the crowd actually got behind Mickie James more than they were for Trish Stratus. So it was kind of weird to see that happen, but I just thought it was one of my favorite matches. Even though it was a Diva match, I thought it was one of the best ones on the card.
Well, it was one of those rare instances where Divas get time in a singles match at WrestleMania, which is something I kind of wish was happening this year. But yeah, definitely worth pointing out.
You had two female wrestlers who not only looked good, but they could wrestle.
Yes.
They weren't just out there to be eye candy. They weren't out there just posing for Playboy. These were two ladies who worked hard in the business, who wanted to put on a good show and basically delivered.
Right.
So, that's why I give them kudos for that match.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a good one. The next WrestleMania is kind of special because as far as Russell and I are concerned, I know this was Russell's first WrestleMania, but we attended this WrestleMania together in Detroit. We have a lot of fond memories of that trip. That was a fun trip. But also, I remember, and the match we picked for this WrestleMania as the number one match almost was the final match on the card at that WrestleMania. The final match on the card ended up being John Cena versus Shawn Michaels for the WWE title, which was a tremendous match, phenomenal match, no question about it. But there was a match that Russell and I really couldn't stop talking about that weekend. I remember this. He was almost laughing at me because I was for sure Batista was beating Undertaker that year. The match turned out to be I think what we both think is the most standout match on the card. It was a really good match. Undertaker won the world title from Batista. There was a lot of build up to this one. Russell, you want to talk a little bit about the story behind the Batista versus Undertaker? I mean, we talked about that match a lot before that weekend before the show.
Yeah. Well, basically, the word in the locker room was that they were both upset that they were not the last on the card.
Right.
And if you
they were going to show them.
If you listen to some of the DVDs, the last thing you want to do is kind of upset the Undertaker. I mean, he's been in the business for years and years and years, and I think because of the way he was kind of treated at this WrestleMania, I think it did kind of put a chip on his shoulder for later on down the line when he did face Shawn Michaels, because they gave the limelight to Shawn Michaels and John Cena. And so Undertaker and Batista are sitting backstage, and Undertaker basically is like, we're going to go out there and kill it. We're going to no holds barred. We're going to be the ones to steal the show. And they did. I thought they should have been the last match on the card.
They were pulling out all the stops.
Facing for championships.
Yeah, I mean, that match was intense. I mean, I really, Cena and Michaels was an awesome match. I mean, there's no question. I mean, I think being there, we weren't so crazy about Cena and Michaels at the moment just because we were so buzzed on the Batista Undertaker match. But Russell's right. That match, in hindsight, I think should have been the last match, considering, Undertaker. I mean, I don't know. Undertaker winning the world title versus Cena retaining the WWE title. But, when Cena's in the midst of his, huge push that lasts for years and years, that's just the decision they decided to go with. That's the lasting impression they want to make. But great WrestleMania match. I mean, if you haven't seen that, if you haven't seen both of those matches, definitely check those out. I mean, look for Russell and I in the crowd. You probably won't see us, but who knows, if you pause that DVD at the right time, you might see us.
Well, one of the most memorable things from that WrestleMania for me, other than the matches, was we were sitting in the in the auditorium, and Kane had just come out to wrestle, and they had done some new pyro. I don't know if you remember this or not, but they had done some pyro, and his symbol was supposed to catch fire and then go out. Well, it caught fire, but it didn't go out. It kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and the symbol looked like it was catching the curtain on fire. And I remember telling Kayvon, I'm like, we may have to get out of here quick if this thing if they don't get that under control.
Well, it was Kane versus Khali. Yeah, it was Kane versus Khali. We weren't even paying attention to the match because the whole time while the cameras for the TV is on the match, we're watching the staff with fire extinguishers come in and like a dozen people trying to put this fire out, which took most of the match to put out. So that was that was an interesting thing. I mean, you certainly can't catch it on TV. I mean, I think when something like that happens, I mean, something's happening on the set or in the crowd. Obviously WWE is going to try their best to point the cameras away from that. But yeah, you're right. I totally remember that. That was a little that made me sweat that moment. As if sitting next to you wasn't scary enough at WrestleMania. I'm kidding. WrestleMania 24 the next year was actually, again, another one I was at. I was lucky enough to go to 3 in a row there. It was my 4th one, and this was a beautiful one in Orlando. Beautiful. The setting was beautiful. They took this old stadium, the Florida Citrus Bowl, and then they cleaned it up, and they did it up real nice. And, I mean, it just looks great, out in the Florida sun and at nighttime and everything. I mean, they actually, lost power at one point during that pay-per-view, but they gained it back. All the lights in the ring went out for action. It wasn't a very long time, but it was an interesting WrestleMania moment. Look, Edge's best match of his career, maybe. Edge versus Undertaker.
I would say yes, especially coming off of you basically look at the Undertaker and who he had fought the last couple of years. He had Randy Orton, then he had Batista, now he's Edge. Basically, Undertaker defeated all of Evolution, and now he's defeating, rated RKO. And yeah. I think it was one of his best matches for Edge. The thing is I think because of the way the match went with some of the crazy spots they had, that it might have affected Edge later on in his career because, it wasn't too much later that he was, having to basically retire because of neck surgery.
Right. I think the thing about that too, Russell, is that, everyone says the WWE Championship is the holy grail of professional wrestling. Obviously, it's the main goal for all the wrestlers. But to win a world title or have a world title on the line and to have also on the line what I consider to be, for obviously the longest time, the real holy grail of WWE was the Undertaker's undefeated streak. Edge got both of those, and they were the last match on the card. I mean, if I'm Edge, as a wrestler, I mean, being in the main event of WrestleMania, facing the Undertaker, I mean, I don't know what else you can ask for. I mean, that match was just so dramatic, and with the interference from, Kurt Hawkins and Zack Ryder, the Edge heads, even during that match, and the referee getting knocked out, and Edge going to nail Undertaker with the camera, just like he did at Survivor Series. And of course, you got Michael Cole saying shades of Survivor Series. You know, I just, there was so much in that match that was just amazing, I think.
Well, some of the things that I take away from that match was the Undertaker didn't pin, his opponent with the tombstone. He actually choked him out in Hell's Gate. He actually had him tapped, which you didn't really hear that much of. So that was something that was kind of crazy. The other thing, couple of matches that was on the card, just quick, was we had a Big Show versus Floyd Mayweather Jr. Now, talk about waste of talent. You got Big Show who's 7 foot something, 500 pounds, and I remember the night before they inducted Ric Flair into the Hall of Fame, and if you listen to Ric Flair's speech, he goes on and says in his speech that he knew Andre the Giant, but he felt that the Big Show, he called him the Giant, that he had the most talent, and that if he would just realize it, the sky would be, there's no limit for him.
He got choked up. Big Show got choked up. I remember that.
Yeah, and for Ric Flair to say this, that to him, this guy in here is the most talented, if he would just reach his potential, if he just would realize it, he would be unstoppable. For him to say that, about another wrestler, especially coming from Ric Flair. And then the match he has at WrestleMania is against a little boxer. Now, he's a legitimate boxer, but it was more for the flair of who it was, sell a little bit of tickets, get Floyd Mayweather out there, Money Mayweather. But for him to let this boxer smack him in the nose, and knock him out, that's the career of the Big Show. You went from WrestleMania 2000 or WrestleMania, what was it? WrestleMania 16. You were headlining WrestleMania. Years later, you're getting knocked out by pound for pound the best, boxer there is. But I just think it was a waste of talent. I mean.
Well, they bring in celebrities to draw money and mainstream attention to the product. I get it from a business standpoint. The match was what it was, of course, and I've struggled with what they've done with Big Show for years, but that's just what they decided to do. But also at this WrestleMania, Ric Flair's last match for WWE, of course, he went on to wrestle for TNA sometime after that. But the match was what it was. They had that one moment where Shawn Michaels did that flip from the apron onto the announcer's table, and man, he landed on the corner of that table right in his midsection. I mean, it just looked brutal. But it was a career-threatening match that Ric Flair had been in a series of before he got to WrestleMania 24. But Shawn did beat him, and of course Ric's family was there ringside, and his now deceased son Reed was there, and all that. And it was and of course, like Russell said, going into the Hall of Fame, which, I mean, if you haven't seen Ric Flair's Hall of Fame speech, that's a whole nother story for a whole nother day. That's something worth checking out too. So, there were big moments at this WrestleMania. Totally get what you're saying with the Big Show, though. Trust me, I've thought about that quite a bit. The 25th anniversary of WrestleMania, back in the same building that the 17th WrestleMania was in Houston, Texas. To me, the greatest match that we've seen so far at WrestleMania took place. That was the first ever meeting at WrestleMania between Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker. Russell, I thought you were talking about the Miss WrestleMania as the best one. oh, yeah, right. No, at WrestleMania 25, Russell, I remember you came over to my house and watched this one with me.
Yeah.
So many. I mean, you could pick apart this match and talk about all the great things and the psychology in this match, but man, no special stipulation, nothing crazy, but the match itself and the near falls, it just was the most pleasant surprise, I think, of any WrestleMania I've seen, that match. And I don't know, Russell, I mean, you probably remember. I mean, we were both, jumping out of our seats a couple moments during that match. I mean, the spot where, I know it's your favorite spot, where Undertaker jumps over the top rope and lands on the cameraman, right? During that match.
Yeah, because you can tell that the cameraman didn't do the spot like he was supposed to, or something happened and went wrong. But the Undertaker landed wrong, and it looked like he was out, to the point where Shawn Michaels was buying time in the ring, and I hadn't seen that happen since Owen Hart and Stone Cold when he dropped him on his head, and
right.
Owen Hart was trying to, walk around to get some time going in there, and it was
right.
kind of the same thing with Shawn Michaels. He was looking like maybe he is hurt. He even made the cross sign with his hands that he thought he was legitimately hurt.
Right.
To me, it's this match. I would have to say is probably in the top five of all WrestleMania matches. Now,
well, let me ask you a question. I mean, I kind of want to say this to the end, but I just don't want to forget. If you're saying this is in top five, and I'm saying this is my favorite WrestleMania match, well, I mean, what is your favorite WrestleMania match? Just so I don't forget to ask you later on. I mean, if this isn't your favorite, I mean, what? I'm just so curious right now. What is your favorite?
Well, just because they're my favorite doesn't mean they are the best.
I understand, but your personal favorite, right? I mean, this is
I'm like I said, my personal favorites.
I mean, if you had to pick one, Russell, if you had to pick one,
it's hard to pick one. That's why I said to me, it's in my top five. I mean, I can tell you, Rock, Cena. That's a astounding one there.
The first Rock and Cena.
The first Rock and Cena that we'll talk about.
Okay.
Andre Hogan.
Okay.
Hogan Rock. Shawn Michaels, Ric Flair. And then Shawn Michaels, Undertaker. There was so much of a build-up. I mean, those, like I said, that's five great WrestleMania matches, right. And they all had great storylines. That's why I guess they were so intriguing to me. Well, and each one of them was kind of like a passing of the torch, if you think of it. Andre Hogan passing right. the torch. Hogan, Rock passing of the torch. Rock, Cena passing of the torch. Shawn Michaels taking out Ric Flair, retired. Undertaker now defeating Shawn Michaels, retired.
Well, that's the thing. What you're saying is that there's emotional value to each of those matches.
Right.
I mean, there's real. I mean, there's like real life. I don't want to say stakes, but there's real life depth behind those matches.
Right.
The thing, right. Well, that's an interesting thing because we'll just follow right in line here. Shawn and Undertaker, the first one, like I said, didn't have a stipulation, but I thought the match was superior to the next year's match.
Was retirement.
Well, it was streak versus career, right? So, and
right.
It was no disqualification. Now, this match had a lot more finishers, had a lot more, I don't know if it had tons more near falls, but I definitely remember like multiple tombstones, multiple super kicks, more so than the first year, I believe. But you and I talked. I remember you and I talked after this match. It was probably like that night, and I mean we liked it. It's not like we didn't like the match, but I just remember you instantly saying, it wasn't as you. I get the feeling you were underwhelmed by the second Undertaker versus Shawn Michaels last match.
No, I think the first one was far better.
But what was it? I mean, what was it that's the difference between those two, though?
Probably because of the build-up.
But the build, don't you think, was stronger for the second one just because Shawn tried so hard to get his second match at The Undertaker, saying, I know I can beat you. I think he said that at the Slammy Awards when they won for Match of the Year. So he tries to get into the Royal Rumble because Undertaker was the world champion at the time. Didn't win the Royal Rumble, so what he has to do is, you remember at the Elimination Chamber when Undertaker was defending that world title in the Chamber, what happened? Shawn Michaels is hiding underneath the Chamber. He super kicks Undertaker, costing him the world title, basically forcing Undertaker's hand to give him the match. Don't you think that's a stronger build-up, though?
No, because I think the first one to me was the one that meant the most. Now with that being said, you go on to follow, because these next couple of WrestleManias, we basically have them, the next 4 involving the Undertaker and the Streak. So you go into the next WrestleMania.
We start to disagree a little bit. It's going to get interesting for just a little bit.
Yeah.
Undertaker starts to really, I don't want to say shine, but he becomes the more of the focus of the WrestleMania than he ever had before. At 27, which is one I also attended, what happens is that Triple H and Undertaker have a match. And I know some people say, well, Triple H is trying to do what Shawn, well, the storyline was he's trying to do what Shawn couldn't do. But their match at Triple H and Undertaker, to me, it wasn't as good as Shawn and Undertaker, the first one at 25, but it was a heck of a match. It was the match of the night because the 27, outside of Edge and Del Rio, I mean, that just being Edge's last match and just the energy of that match was really the standout of 27, because the 27 card, even though I was there, I mean, I enjoyed the show immensely, but it just, the card itself wasn't outstanding. But at 28, you get what Russell thinks was the match of the night, which I guess I disagree with. But I don't know, Russell, talk to me about 27 through 28. The first Triple H and Undertaker, I'm sorry, it's actually the second Triple H and Undertaker, but the first consecutive of 2 consecutive matches they had into the Hell in a Cell match at 28.
Well, I think, it did have the play. I think they were using this WrestleMania to actually build up for WrestleMania 28, because, at the time, I think Undertaker was really winding down, and I think he was, wanting to actually stop at 20-0. I honestly think, in my heart of hearts, I think he wanted to stop, but he didn't want to give the streak up to someone who was established. And at the time, he was being seen at, UFC matches. There was a word about the Brock Lesnar, and I think at the time he honestly wanted to face Brock Lesnar earlier before the streak was actually broken. And I think it was kind of around this time that was being said. If you remember, in the first WrestleMania, not 27, Undertaker wins. However, he has to be taken out.
He's carded out. He can't
carded out.
Walk out.
He can't even get. Yeah, he was. It was so brutal of a match that even though he won, he was so exhausted that he was not the one to leave on his feet, and that was so much pointed out in the build-up to the next WrestleMania 28, where Triple H was saying, "I beat you, or you beat me, but you're the one that had to be carried out."
Yeah, but the thing
Undertaker was the one that wanted the match.
But here's the thing. He was different than Shawn Michaels, though. You just said it. Undertaker was the one who wanted the match, because Shawn, for their second match with the Undertaker, he was the one begging for that match. Triple H said, "No, I don't want a second match with the Undertaker, because I know I'll take out the Undertaker for good. I don't want to end it."
Right.
He didn't want to end it, because in his mind he said, if I take the Undertaker again, he's done. But Undertaker, he wanted it. He felt like he had something to prove, because, like you said, he's the one who couldn't continue after 27. So,
and that's what made it so dramatic, was because Shawn Michaels in that WrestleMania, he was being the powers that be, coming out in the white hat versus, the Undertaker in the black hat. The entrances were crazy. And he loses to the Undertaker, but he doesn't think that he could, but he feels that he didn't give his all, or that if he just could have done something differently, he could have beat him. So for him to beg for the next match to the point where, he was crazy about it, said a lot. Then it builds up for the match between him and Triple H, where Triple H totally is different than Shawn Michaels as far as fighting techniques. Shawn Michaels, quick cat-like, not many power moves, hit you with a sweet chin music, where Triple H is more of, I'm going to bash you in with this sledgehammer, I'm going to cut you, I'm doing everything I could basically do. It's more muscle moves, so forth. That it's more brutality. And so then in his mind, you beat me, Undertaker, but you're the one that can't, go back. You can't get on your feet and walk out stage. You got to be carried out. And that set in the Undertaker's mind that he couldn't, walk out on his own 2 feet. And then when Triple H says to Shawn Michaels, if I do face him again, I'm not going to just beat him, but I'm going to end him. It set up the end of the era shirt, which I have, of all three guys. It was like them all coming together, and that's why I say I believe Undertaker, to me, that was the last real match that I enjoyed with the Undertaker.
Well, it was so symbolic.
It was so brutal because, I remember in the match he gets super kicked by Shawn Michaels, then gets a pedigree.
Oh,
and
God, I thought that was it. Russell, I thought that
Yeah.
was, I said, there's no question, this is it. I mean, I was jumping out of my seat, but he kicked out.
So to me, it was the coming of the end, and that's why I said, to me, I think, especially how they ended it with all three, guys on the stage, hugging one another, the T-shirt says, end of an era, we're done, That's how it should have went. To me, in the back of my head, it's like, that's how it should have went.
Well, he could have left undefeated.
Right.
The streak never had to be broken. We'll get to that here in a minute. But contrary to the greatness of that match, which it was great, I don't deny that at all. The build up for a year for, quote, once in a lifetime Rock versus John Cena. It's a Hogan versus Rock thing to me. I'm not saying Cena was as great as Hogan or anything like that, but he's definitely comparable to Hogan. It's a different era, so it's a different thing. But it's just, I don't know. I can't not say that wasn't the match of WrestleMania 28. And hey, that's a hard pick because WrestleMania 28 to me was the best WrestleMania since 17, probably, from top to bottom. So I don't know. I can definitely understand the argument for Hell in a Cell, which Russell thinks is the best. But Russell, I know you enjoyed Rock versus Cena, the first one. Because it was, that felt like there was a lot on the line, professionally and personally, right?
Well, here's the one thing. The difference was with the Rock Cena. It wasn't, to me, the build-up was there, but when you have somebody that is not a full-time wrestler like The Rock wasn't a full-time wrestler like that, they had a year to build it up. It was more on the microphone, anything else, back and forth, boots to asses, the whole 9 yards. But what I didn't like about it is I knew The Rock was going to win. I just knew it. He wasn't coming back to WrestleMania to lose. He's coming back to get one more championship run, and then
but Hogan came back to lose. I mean, Hogan passed the torch to Rock at WrestleMania 18, so it wasn't too far-fetched to think that Rock could lose, right?
Here was the big difference. Hogan, in my opinion, was on his last leg at the time. To me, he had already been there, done that. I was surprised to actually see the reason Hogan got the their run is because the crowd reacted the way they did. It was not written in the storyline for Hogan to flip and go back to the yellow and red. The crowd is what did that. And they were thinking it was going to be the same thing for Cena, that Cena was going to be riding off in the sunset. However, The Rock was like, I still can wrestle for one thing. I can still bring it. And I didn't leave wrestling because I had to. I left because I basically made another career for people like you, John Cena. That was one of the big things. So he came in, whipped Cena's ass, and then it wasn't as meaningful to me because I knew that he was going to give the favor back to Cena. He was, a year later. And that's kind of like, it's like Ali Frazier 1, Ali Frazier 5, it's supposed to be one and done. This is the only, the one time you're going to see these two go at it, and then they do it again. So it takes away from it. If it was only a one-time deal, it would mean more. But because they end up doing it again, to me, it's like, a build-up that ends up not being the way it should have. That makes any sense.
Well, it does. I don't know. To me, that was the main sell of that WrestleMania, and that's why I pick it. However, that being said, they did have a second match. It actually didn't turn out to be once in a lifetime. It turned out to be a WWE Championship match the next year at WrestleMania 29. Again, kind of like with the Michaels Undertaker thing, I thought the match was inferior somewhat to the first meeting when the title wasn't on the line. A lot more near falls in the WrestleMania 29 match, but you pretty much knew this was going to happen. I mean, after Cena had to, they're not going to have Cena lose and then not have him get revenge. So he comes back, and not only does he beat The Rock, but he beats The Rock for the WWE Championship that The Rock had won and ended CM Punk's long title reign for. And, of course, some argue that it should have been a triple threat match. CM Punk himself has argued that. I mean, I can certainly see that after the epic reign with the title that CM Punk had. But they wanted Rock and Cena again. But, of course, that year, I guess something I want to touch on at WrestleMania 29. I know a lot of people are just crazy about Punk and Undertaker at that WrestleMania, but I think Russell and I are both in agreement that I don't know. I don't understand why people are so crazy about Punk and Undertaker from 29. I mean, after all Russell just described, I mean, how is it supposed to be believable that Triple H, Shawn Michaels, multiple times couldn't take Undertaker out, but CM Punk was going to beat him?
Well, the other thing they were playing on, and this is what I said, it would have been better for the Undertaker not to face CM Punk and just been done. The crazy thing is that, Undertaker, after defeating Triple H with Shawn Michaels in a steel cage, end of an era, he's done. He walks out, sunset, it ends it. The next year, nobody would know this. Paul Bearer, passes away. You never see Undertaker at any Hall of Fame. You never see him at Hall of Fame. He makes the appearance at the Hall of Fame when they induct Paul Bearer. To me, it was like when Paul Bearer, passed away, it kind of took away from the Undertaker's character. And and they were playing on that with the storyline. Using the urn and like this was Paul Bearer's urn, and some of the things I just thought was not tasteful. And I felt like CM Punk more was, it was like he wished it was Vince McMahon in the urn, because he felt that more portrayed, not being in the championship match, which I felt he should have. Yeah. He earned it. He was the longer reigning champion. He had Paul Heyman, one of the best talkers. And so I think, he was upset that he wasn't, and it showed in his match, and I think The Undertaker was physically and mentally spent after Paul Bearer passed. And when he had the opportunity the following year to face Brock Lesnar, he already knew in his mindset this is a perfect opportunity for me to let it be over, to me finally be defeated and it be believable and be a shocker.
Well,
I just didn't think out of the last 5, 6 WrestleManias that we've talked about, as far as the streak goes, that it would have been CM Punk was probably one of the last ones on the list of defeating The Undertaker.
I would have rather seen John Cena versus Undertaker that year and CM Punk versus The Rock for the title. Punk should have lost that title at WrestleMania after that long reign. And John Cena versus Undertaker is a match everyone wants to see. I can't say everyone. I certainly want to see it because to me it's way higher up on the list than Punk and Undertaker was, as far as Undertaker opponents. But you're absolutely right. 28 should have been The Undertaker's end. He leaves with Triple H and Shawn Michaels. He goes out 20-0. Put him in the Hall of Fame. Great. I mean, now we're in this whole thing with Bray Wyatt that really doesn't make sense to me, which I've talked about in previous episodes, and it is what it is. But I just, and the streak got broken. I want to mention, before we move on to 30, our last WrestleMania, we're going to talk about that at 29 was the debut of The Shield. Probably the greatest stable of 3 guys we've seen in I don't know how long in WWE. They debuted against Big Show, Randy Orton, and Sheamus and beat him at WrestleMania, just like they had won another 6-man tag at WrestleMania 30 against Kane and the New Age Outlaws. I was lucky enough to go to WrestleMania 30. It was a great experience. That moment at the beginning of WrestleMania 30 with Hogan, Austin, and Rock was electrifying, no pun intended. I said to Russell, listen, that triple threat for the WWE title that Daniel Bryan won was the match of the night. Russell, you had a little trouble, I think, picking a moment. Of course, Brock Lesnar beat Undertaker and ended the streak. The match itself, obviously, Undertaker was in bad health and out most of that match. Didn't really know what was going on. I mean, you can just see it in his face. So the match itself wasn't good, but historic, obviously. I mean, I've never seen a crowd just hush like that. You can't believe that Undertaker just got beat. But, Russell, you had a hard moment trying to pick out a moment from this WrestleMania. Were you not a fan of the triple threat that Daniel Bryan won, or what was it about 30? I mean, you mentioned that you like Cesaro slamming the Big Show and the Andre the Giant Battle Royal and winning.
Yeah, I take that. I think of some of the things that I enjoyed was the Memorial Battle Royal and Cesaro picking up the Big Show, literally picking him up, carrying him over to the side of the ring and tossing him up over. I mean, Stone Cold said that was probably one of the craziest things he had ever seen, the strength of Cesaro be able to do that. The other thing, the triple threat to me, it's kind of like this year's, WrestleMania. They had to have a triple threat because the crowd was not going to allow Batista, to be the WWE champion.
Well, I mean, would you have really been okay with the main event of WrestleMania 30 being Batista versus Randy Orton?
I honestly would have rather, looking back at it,
like I did,
I would have rather seen it. No, I honestly would have rather seen it been a Fatal 4-Way with Triple H, Batista, Randy Orton, and
I kind of
Bryan.
thought we were going to get that if Daniel Bryan versus Triple H ended in a double countout or some sort of double disqualification.
Yeah, I didn't like the fact that Daniel Bryan had a match at the beginning, then he turned around and he has the match at the end. To me, it's WrestleMania. You've got a lot of people that could be on the card, and you basically took 20 minutes away from other participants that could have been on the card.
But you said it, Russell. That crowd, the crowd forced them to do that in the sense of they just wanted as much Daniel Bryan as they could handle, and they got
right. It was, and that's where we go to the crowd is who really dictates how WrestleMania is going to be. It can set it up for many things that happen. You can see wrestlers making their debut and get over or be put back on the shelf. You can see legends coming back and into the limelight and getting cheered and advancing a storyline like we've seen with Hogan. You can see the passing of the torch, whether the crowd likes it or not. It's going to dictate, this WrestleMania crowd is going to dictate what happens the following night, that Monday night after WrestleMania. And this is what makes me so nervous about how they allow the crowd to have that much influence, because with Brock Lesnar not knowing if he's going to be with the WWE or not after WrestleMania, does he give the lackluster performance he did so many years ago when he faced Goldberg? Or, knowing he's leaving?
I don't think so, because I think the crowd's going to be behind Lesnar, because so many people in that WrestleMania crowd, being a, quote, smart wrestling crowd or really hardcore wrestling fans that go to WrestleMania and travel to go there, they're not going to want Reigns to win the title. So Lesnar's going to be cheered, which I think is going to motivate him.
So we joked about this last year, if you remember right. We had said that Lesnar, because the same thing happened last year, Lesnar's contract was up after WrestleMania, and we had joked that what if Lesnar gets the Undertaker in an arm bar? I know there's a name for it. They say it.
The Kimura lock.
He gets him in the Kimura lock. We had said this. What if he gets him in the Kimura lock and says, "Hell with Triple H, hell with Vince McMahon.
He doesn't want to let go.
I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to make this guy tap, and I'm going to end the streak, even if I'm not supposed to." What are they going to do? I'm not signing. I'm going back to UFC. Remember the conversation we had about this?
I know, but I mean, he has a contract with World Wrestling Entertainment. I mean, he would get sued if he didn't go along with the creative. I mean, if he actually physically harmed Roman Reigns, or if he had done that to Undertaker, I mean, there's legal action that would be taken, right? I mean, he has a contract.
But the other side of it is that, if you're Brock Lesnar, you've been there, you've done it, and I mean, he walked out a couple of weeks ago. That just makes me think. Some of the things that Paul Heyman's been saying, I honestly think is that you're going to get a fit with Roman Reigns.
That's what I want, Russell. Every time you mention that's what I want. I want Lesnar to talk for Heyman. I want Reigns. I want Heyman to talk for Reigns. I want Reigns to shut up. He doesn't need to talk. He obviously is showing that he can't talk. He needs to be just this killer who just doesn't say anything, let Heyman talk for him. He screws Lesnar. See, Lesnar. Here's the thing about Lesnar that I don't like. Yeah, I enjoy watching him perform, but he doesn't love this. He doesn't love wrestling. He's here for a paycheck. That promo you saw him cut on Raw last night was real. He doesn't care about being a professional wrestler.
Right. It's all about the
Roman
money.
Reigns' blood. It's all about the money. That's the difference between him and Roman Reigns. This is Roman Reigns' family. He grew up in this business. This he has to do that. I mean, this is his lifeblood, So that's the difference to me. I mean, see you, Lesnar. I'm not going to cry one tear. That's how I feel.
Well, that's what I was saying. The crowd always dictates what's going to happen, and this WrestleMania, you're going to have a lot of new faces that are going to make their names. May have some swerves at the end. So, we will post our WrestleMania 31 predictions on our Facebook page.
Yeah. We're just less than 2 weeks away from WrestleMania, so definitely check those. It'll be posted soon before, pretty close to WrestleMania. Make sure you like that page, guys. Facebook, just search RKO You Didn't Know. We post tons of great stuff. Results from WWE, but also from TNA, from Lucha Underground, even New Japan Pro Wrestling. breaking news stories, all that good stuff, and links to our podcast episodes. So definitely check that out. We appreciate the support. We want to keep this podcast going. And like Russell says to me all the time, we want people to comment. We want people to be engaged in our conversations, Russell, right? I mean, it's not just between you and me. We want other people's opinions too.
Right. Don't just like the page. Put your questions on the page. Tell us what you think is your top 5 WrestleMania moments. That could be something we discuss on our next podcast. Yeah. We've also talked about having a live podcast. In the next couple of weeks.
Right. We're thinking for for episode 20, which will be 2 episodes from now, we're going to do a video podcast. We're going to sit down, Russell and I, much like you see on the WWE Network. Stone Cold does his podcast with Mr. McMahon and with Triple H. We want to do that. We want to do something where you can see us talk to each other just to switch it up a bit. So I think we're going to try and make that happen. But definitely follow us like us on Facebook, and comment your thoughts. I mean, we really care about what you think. And that's a way for us to get this podcast and that Facebook page to grow, is for people to become more engaged. So we would definitely appreciate that. I mean, we're in the iTunes store. We're on Podomatic.com. It's all free. It's really easy to listen to. You can listen, you can download, you can subscribe, you can rate us in the iTunes store, comment us. We don't care. If you totally disagree with us and we think we're idiots for saying what we say about wrestling and you have a completely different opinion, that's great. We want to hear it. We honestly want to hear it, and we just want you to be engaged. So, look, this is our last podcast before WrestleMania 31. As Russell said, we'll post our predictions for WrestleMania 31, and in our next episode, we will talk about WrestleMania 31. So, Russell, do you want to go ahead and take us home for this podcast?
Yeah. We thank you once again for listening, and like I said, it is WrestleMania time. The podcast is a little longer right now because we are talking about what we thought were our greatest matches from WrestleMania 16 to WrestleMania 30, and hopefully WrestleMania 31 gives us a little bit more to talk about in the next coming weeks. So for Kayvon, I'm Russell. Keep reaching for the sky.